The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
Lockdowns hardly present welcoming conditions for hopeful newcomers to this country. But in the context of a global pandemic, Canada is still eager to attract immigrants from around the world. Tonight, we'll hear first from the federal minister in charge of immigration, Marco Mendicino, on why the government thinks it can still meet its targets of more than 400,000 immigrants a year, despite COVID-19. Then, a conversation exploring the role those new arrivals might play in the country's post-pandemic economic recovery. It's Monday, January 18th, and that's next on the agenda. With international borders restricted and travel discouraged, COVID-19 has disrupted the customary welcoming of upwards of 300,000 newcomers annually looking to call Canada home. With us to explain the significance of that, we welcome Marco Mendicino. He is Canada's Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. He's the Liberal MP for Eglinton Lawrence, just a little up the street from the studio, which is where we find him this evening. Minister, it's good to see you again. How are you managing under these COVID conditions?
All things being equal, we're doing okay. I hope you and your family are staying healthy. And of course, it's great to be back with you.
Wonderful. Lovely to have you here as well. Let's just start with this. We want to bring to our viewers' attention the fact that you have some very ambitious new immigration targets. And here we go. This is quoting from the Government of Canada. In 2021, our target is 401,000 immigrants. Of these, about 60% fall under the economic category, which will help the Canadian economy recover from COVID-19. Looking ahead, Canada plans to welcome 411,000 immigrants in 2022 and 421,000 immigrants in 2023. This works out to almost 1% of our population. I want to give you a chance to speak to those Canadians who feel that the government's top priority ought to be its current citizens who are already here, as opposed to these new citizens who are not yet here. How would you respond to that?
Well, the first thing I would say is you've laid out our immigration plan very clearly, and you're quite right. We do plan to continue to grow. I will say when I first took the job, I was very excited. I knew it would be a challenging portfolio. I don't think my crystal ball was polished enough to anticipate a once-in-a-century pandemic in COVID-19. And over the course of the past 11 months or so, we have demonstrated that we can keep immigration going by innovating with new policies to keep the corridors, bringing in the workers, the international students to accelerate our economic recovery. We've also added resources at the border so that we can ensure that we are seeing people come into Canada in a way that is safe. And I would point out that our quarantining protocols are very effective at that. But just to get to the crux of your question, Steve, you're quite right that when I tabled the immigration plan a little while ago, we had a choice. We could have put a pause, we could have reversed, we could have cut immigration. But I firmly believe, and our government believes that through immigration, we will continue to grow. And the numbers bear that out. 1 in 3 business is led by an immigrant, and they in turn employ hundreds of thousands of Canadians. And when you survey our economy, some of the gaps in the workforce are in our most essential sectors. And I think primarily about our healthcare sector, where right now we have roughly 1 in 3 immigrants who are helping to provide those reinforcements to our doctors, our nurses, our personal support workers who are confronting a second wave. And I'll just pause to say a big thank you to them. So we believe that immigration is a way to propel our economy and our prosperity going forward. That's what this plan will do. Having said that, do you think you will have difficulty hitting the targets that you've advanced, given the travel restrictions that are in place and, of course, the not complete closing, but certainly much tighter Canadian-American border? Well, first, I would say we've taken the decisions that are necessary to protect the health and safety of Canadians. And as I also pointed out, we have been very effective at keeping the virus out while ensuring that we have the workers and the students that we need to keep our economy going. I am confident that we can hit the levels that we have set out in our target. I'm confident because we are innovating at quantum speeds. As I pointed out, we have created new policies that allow the people into the country, but in a manner that is safe. I also think we've got a unique opportunity to take a look at the domestic immigration population that is already within our borders. And that is looking at temporary workers who work in the healthcare sector, who work in the building and trades, where, I hear from business leaders all the time, how can we transition some of these temporary workers into permanent residency? Because we don't just need them today for the short term, we need them tomorrow to build up our infrastructure. I think about our hometown here in Toronto, where we're in a housing crunch. Immigrants can help to address that by building the necessary new additional affordable housing, rapid housing that we need. I've already mentioned the healthcare sector, where we see that without immigration, we would be further strapped for the personnel and the resources to confront the second wave. I think that by again examining very carefully the populations that are already here, and I include in that as well our international student population. These are among the best and the brightest who are at the early stages of their lives, who have chosen Canada to come and take part in an education. They are very much looking forward to staying and contributing. They too have helped in some of the most essential sectors. So I think we've got an opportunity here to hit those levels.
Well, let me just follow up on that, because from what I've heard, many students who are from countries outside of Canada and who would want to study as international students here haven't come, because there's no point in coming to a campus that you can't take classes on, and so they've stayed home and are doing their education virtually. If that's the case, and I'm sure it is in many cases, how is that helpful to us?
Well, international students contribute over $21.6 billion to our economy.
When they're here, Minister.
Year. And when they are here, and we have revived a pathway to enable them to come back to Canada, again, working very closely with the provincial governments who are responsible for the day-to-day administration of our schools. And in addition to that, we've also innovated, Steve. We have created a two-stage process that allows international students to begin their courses abroad online. And for those who are here, who are already giving back, who are stepping up on the front lines of hospitals and long-term care homes, again, where we desperately need those reinforcements, we have created additional work permit flexibility. And I will say that this is one of the great ways in which we are demonstrating our rapid ability to respond to the pandemic. And as a result of those innovations, we are seeing international students step up, give back to their communities, and also consider staying longer. I mean, their status may be temporary, but their contributions are long lasting. And I think it behooves us to ask ourselves whether or not we've got an opportunity to invite them to stay, because there are pressing economic reasons to justify it, as well as long-term demographic challenges.
Okay, let's go back to that stat board we had up at the very beginning, and I want to talk about the 60% of this year's intake falling under the economic category. And to that end, I just wanted to clarify, do you imagine that will come under the so-called express entry program, or would that include other groups as well, such as migrant workers who, for example, are doing very difficult agricultural work in southwestern Ontario, for example?
Well, I think that's a perfectly relevant question, given where we are at in the pandemic. And as I mentioned earlier, we obviously look forward to the day when we can reopen our borders. We're not there yet. And that does allow us for an opportunity to take a look at temporary workers, right across the continuum of our economy. And I would say that there are workers who possess a range of skills that we need. You mentioned migrant workers. Again, nearly 1 in 2 workers in the agricultural sector is a migrant. They are working under challenging conditions. I'm aware of that. We have provided over $100 million of support to help improve the working conditions, including their lodging, to respond to the intrinsic risks that go along with working on farms, in food processing plants. Do we have an opportunity now to potentially broaden the pathway for them to become permanent residents? Do we have an opportunity to take a look at our healthcare sector, where approximately 1 in 3 workers has come from abroad? Do we have an opportunity to take a look likewise in the tech sector? And here it allows us to look at some of the temporary pathways, for example, like the global skills strategy, where we work closely with blue chip companies in the tech sector. We've invited them in to come and apply their trade. Can we also look at transitioning them to permanent residency? And when you combine all of these populations together, I think that we will absolutely be in a position to hit our express entry, our economic class targets, which are laid out in our levels plan.
Maybe you could help us understand better what the pandemic has done to refugees who are trying to claim status here in Canada. during this very, as you point out, once-in-a-century moment in history?
Well, this is a tale of two pandemics, and what the virus has taught us is that if you're a vulnerable population, if you are a refugee or an asylum seeker, if you are homeless and without shelter, you are far more susceptible to contracting the disease. And so it is incumbent on us, I think, as a government to respond to that. And I will say that the United Nations has recognized Canada as the #1 resettling country in the world for the last 2 years. That's something I am very proud of, particularly now as COVID-19 has really put a pressure on our borders. And look, it's not as though the crisis around migration has been in any way abated by COVID-19. It's, if anything, that pressure will continue to mount. So developing, again, a way in which we can partner with our international stakeholders, for example, the UN, as well as the IOM, has allowed us to continue to resettle the most urgent cases. And in fact, we have resettled approximately 8,000 refugees in 2020, despite the pandemic. And that's not just because of the policies that our government has introduced. It's thanks in large part to the compassion and the unyielding enthusiasm that we see from Canadians themselves, who believe that Canada should be a safe refuge for the world's most vulnerable. And certainly, I think that we will be in a position to carry on with that work going forward.
I do want to ask you about what so many businesses, institutions, entities in our country at this time have had to do during COVID-19, and that is, of course, go virtual, as you and I are speaking right now. I want to find out more about what your department's done in that area. You recently launched a new platform for online citizenship applications, starting with a pilot program of, I think, about 5,000 applicants. How's that going so far?
It's going really well. And in a world that is increasingly virtual, we're leading the way in Canada, especially when it comes to our immigration system. We have the only one where we have moved our citizenship ceremonies online, to my knowledge. And now we're also moving into the digital space when it comes to testing applicants. And look, I will say this is, again, one of the most special functions that I get to exercise as a minister, to have the privilege to welcome people who have come to Canada to build that next chapter in their lives, to welcome their families here, and to see the look in their eye. And it certainly was quite a unique moment when last Canada Day on July 1st, we held the country's first ever simultaneous virtual citizenship ceremony from coast to coast to coast, made up of healthcare workers, again, welcoming them into the family of our citizenship, but also allowing them to greater give back to our communities at a time when we need the reinforcements in our hospitals, in our long-term care homes. And we're able to do that thanks to our efforts to innovate and to leverage technology. And I think we will see that scaled up going forward.
Well, let me find out about that, because if you're talking about more than 400,000 immigrants coming in the ensuing years, and you're up to 5,000 on the virtual platform right now, I mean, that's pretty small potatoes at this stage of the game, right?
Yeah, but let's not forget that we are also going when it comes to our landing processes and when it comes to permanent residence. So, for instance, whereas before you needed to meet in person with an immigration officer, we're now conducting those interviews online and in virtual space. We are allowing more applications to be submitted digitally. And when you take a step back from each of these individual processes, my vision for our immigration system going forward is that it is completely virtual and touchless, and that each and every one of these steps is integrated so that we become the envy of the world. And we have an advantage. We have a competitive advantage when it comes to our immigration. The OECD has recognized that we are the best in class when it comes to integrating newcomers. In fact, one of the last international trips that I took, was to Germany, where I was invited by Chancellor Angela Merkel to talk about our express entry program and how we are leveraging our online services to begin to orient newcomers into their communities. And that includes getting them the skills and the services and the support that they need prior to arrival. And so I think when you combine the real precedent that we have, plus our intrepid spirit when it comes to innovating going forward, that we will continue to retain that competitive advantage going forward as a result of moving more digital.
How much tougher do you think it is for a new immigrant to come to this country in the midst of COVID-19 literally having to arrive here and then, instead of sort of being embraced by the community they come into, they're into quarantine like everybody else. And now, of course, with the new state of emergency in Ontario, they're being told to shelter at home and basically have no contact with anybody else. How tough is that?
I think that in relative terms, it is a small price to pay to come and quarantine for the benefit of your personal safety, the safety of your loved ones, and your broader community and neighborhood, in exchange for the opportunity to stay in Canada, to take it up in education, to ply a trade in the economy, and to become hopefully one day Canadian. And the reason I say that is because we have a shared sense of values in this country, that we respect one another for our differences, for our diversity. That has been one of the bedrocks on which this country has been built, and it has yielded not only in physical and actual bricks and mortar, but it has helped us to build a country that we can all be proud of. And it is that shared sense of, I think, common decency, but also the opportunity to achieve one's potential. And, let's be honest, I mean, we live in an increasingly complex world. I think Canada is a country that where people cast their eyes abroad, look at you with a sense of enthusiasm, notwithstanding the pandemic. And that is in large as we as a government believe in immigration, and we've also responded to the challenges that have been posed by COVID-19.
Well, let me follow up with this. If memory serves, there's currently a $530 processing fee for new immigrants, and then a $100 right of citizenship fee. And I thought in 2019, your government had pledged to get rid of all that. What's the status of that pledge today?
We did, and I certainly hope to be able to advance that work. It is part of my mandate letter to help to reduce barriers when it comes to becoming a member of our family of citizenship. I've already mentioned the fact that we are reducing some of the challenges and the disruption that has been caused by COVID-19 by moving into virtual and digital space. And, look, in addition to that, when it comes to our immigration system as a whole, we have one of the most inviting, open, and inclusive systems around the world, which has been recognized. And that's why, for instance, we get to go abroad and share our best practices. And it's why, frankly, there is such a high demand when it comes to setting our levels. And we are responding to that demand by being ambitious, by believing that the way to accelerate our economic recovery coming out of the pandemic is to chart out a course in conjunction with immigration. That is what our plan will do.
But I'm not hearing a commitment from you before the next election to get rid of that fee. Is that right?
Well, look, I really am enthusiastic about trying to reduce barriers. So stay tuned for more. And, when I have more to say, we'll come back on the show and tell you about it.
Good enough. We'll hold you to that. Let me ask you, looking ahead, about the creation of this municipal nominee program, which is, I guess it addresses a longstanding problem that we have, which is that the vast majority of new immigrants to Canada are settling in the big cities when, of course, we need more people in less populated areas. How's that going so far?
Well, it's going very well, and we have been engaging with our provincial partners as well as local municipal elected officials and business leaders when it comes to the municipal nominee program. This is the latest iteration of a series of pilots which we have introduced, including, for example, the rural and northern immigration pilot, even more so the Atlantic immigration pilot, which is basically a way to attract more newcomers to settle in Atlantic Canada, where we are aging more rapidly than anywhere else. It has been an unqualified success in that part of the country because, again, not only that we have developed this policy, but because local businesses and chambers of commerce have helped to sponsor newcomers who have the exact skill set that is required to meet the demands of the communities in which they are arriving. And I think that the municipal nominee program will be the next evolution of a series of pilots that are designed to, as you point out, help distribute population. Because if we never said another word to advertise or promote the big cities like Toronto, Montreal, Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, etc., people would still pour in because they have a world-renowned reputation. But, for example, you would know that, that there are many opportunities to settle in Antigonish, where, for example, we've had folks like Tarek Hadhad, who was a Syrian refugee who's started a business, Peace by Chocolate, who's now employing many people in that area. And that isn't only because of the work of resettling when it comes to sponsoring refugees. It's also because we have the capacity to welcome newcomers through these regional pilots, which do encourage people to look at other opportunities around the country. And look, Steve, you know this as well as I do. We live in one of the most geographically diverse, vast, bountiful countries in the world. You could pick just about any place on it and find a great life, and that's why immigration and our regional pilots are so important, such an important part of our blueprint.
Just in our last 30 seconds here, I wonder if one of the perverse good byproducts of COVID-19 is that more new immigrants actually don't want to live in the very densely populated cities and want to get away from COVID-19 into more sparsely populated areas. Are you seeing that?
Well, certainly we would be very inviting of that phenomenon should it occur, because we live in a very dense hometown. But I'll say, look, as a son of an immigrant, it is an immense privilege to be the Minister for Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship. And as I think about how we continue to build this country going forward, immigration plays an essential role for our economy, but also to continue to build the country that we want. And whenever I talk about this subject matter, I talk about how we shouldn't be constrained by our demographics, that our destiny should really be a function of our belief in immigration, which again is very much in our DNA. And I look forward to continuing this important work throughout the pandemic and beyond.
That's Marco Mendicino, the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, and the MP for Eglinton Lawrence. We're thankful for your time here on TVO tonight, Minister. Stay well.
And you as well, Steve. Great to be with you.
Canada invites hundreds of thousands of newcomers to our shore every year, from permanent residents to temporary foreign workers, international students and refugees. As the world absorbs the shocks of this pandemic, what role might immigration play in Canada's recovery and beyond? With us to consider that, we welcome, in the Regal Heights neighbourhood of the provincial capital, that's near Dufferin and St. Clair, Senator Ratna Omidvar, a member of the Independent Senators Group. In North York, Ontario, Ravi Jain, partner at Green and Spiegel LLP and past chair of the Canadian Bar Association's Immigration Law Section. And in Waterloo, Ontario, Jenna Hennebrey, associate professor at the Balsillie School of International Affairs and co-founder of the International Migration Research Centre, which is at Wilfrid Laurier University. And it's good to have you three with us here tonight here on TVO. I just want to remind everybody, as we embark on our discussion here, of what the Government of Canada's new targets are. In 2021, the federal government says our target is 401,000 immigrants. Of these, about 60% fall under the economic category, which will help the Canadian economy recover from COVID-19. So say the feds. Ravi, let me get you into this first. What's your view on those targets?
Well, I mean, I think it's no surprise that they have these targets. I think the government's been clear that they want to bring in this number, these numbers of immigrants. But the question is, can they meet the targets? And if you look at what happened last year, I mean, if you had your permanent resident visa issued before March 18 from anywhere in the world, with the U.S. being an exception, you could come. But anyone with a permanent resident visa issued after March 18 could not come. And it got to the point where the government was inviting people to signal, okay, are you ready to come? If you are, signal to us. And they've taken that down. So my own view is that I just don't think the government was that keen to bring in a lot of people who maybe didn't have jobs lined up. I think that there was a concern that with the high unemployment rate, that maybe it wasn't a good idea. Nothing official has been said, but that's my sense. So I think in terms of whether they're going to meet them next year, I think it really depends on COVID. If COVID gets wrestled to the ground, then maybe we'll start to release all the people from last year, frankly, who've been waiting a long time. And we'll start to look at other options that the minister talked about in terms of looking at people who are already here.
Senator Omidvar, how do you see it?
I see it slightly differently. I think it's not business as usual. So we have to find different ways of reaching our targets. And the minister indicated in his statement to TVO, and I believe that is the right way to go, which is to reach into the communities of temporary workers and others who are already in Canada. They do not have to have the added criteria on health or travel and checks and quarantine because they're already here. And this is something Canadians don't know. In 2019, 1.2 million newcomers arrived in Canada. Of these, only 28% were permanent. The rest are temporary foreign workers, international students. They belong to the special labor mobility class, and they include asylum workers. And we're not even talking yet about undocumented, and I don't know the numbers, but let me just suggest, if the minister wants to reach these targets, he can do so if he reaches out to people who are already here.
Yeah, let me follow up on that with Jenna Hennebrey, and just to get a better understanding of who we're talking about when we talk about non-high skilled workers who are making up part of that mix. Who are we talking about there?
Yeah, I mean, in Canada, we have entries of over 450,000 temporary migrant workers annually. And a proportion of these are what the government classifies using their occupation classification system as lower skilled jobs that they enter into. And those numbers are people that come into, or those people are come into the temporary foreign worker program specifically, which brought in roughly 100,000 entries in 2019. But overall, we're talking about large numbers of people that are in the country that could be doing jobs that are currently in the country, doing jobs ranging from working in agriculture to working in the service sector, manufacturing, construction, a whole range of jobs that indeed during 2020 were deemed essential.
And just as a quick follow-up to that, of all of those jobs you just listed, I realize this is a vast generalization here, but humor me for a second. What percentage of those jobs are jobs that Canadians who've lived here for a long time don't want to do anymore?
Well, we don't really have a stat on that percentage per se, but I can tell you that there's, as we saw with agriculture in 2020, when there was delay in workers coming into Canada, growers were scrambling to try to get people to fill those jobs, offering $25 an hour if they could attract Canadian workers, and failed to do so. So we know that these are jobs that are not, that have long-term issues in terms of filling labor shortages.
Okay. Ravi, back to you. What industries, in your judgment, is the Canadian government prioritizing?
Just before we go there, I just note that in New Brunswick, I think that they tried to shut down the foreign workers coming into the province, right? And then they realized that they couldn't attract the Canadians and the students and stuff that they wanted to. But sorry, the question was, what groups are we attracting? So, I mean, the reality is we don't really go by industry. We go by categories like the family class and skilled workers and that kind of thing. So we bring about 200,000 under express entry, which is our system where we people express an interest. They create an online profile, and the government comes in and scoops out every few weeks the cream of the crop, and then invites them to apply. So there's express entry. There's the provincial nominee programs, where the provinces run different economic programs, et cetera. So in that group, there's about 200,000. Then there's about 100,000 that come in under the family class. So parents, grandparents, spouses, common law partners, et cetera. And about 60,000 refugees they're targeting. And then some other miscellaneous groups that would fall under, to a total of 100,000 there. So on average, I would say we're about just under 2/3 economic. And 1/3 family or refugee, whereas in the United States, for instance, it's the other way. It's 2/3 family and then 1/3 economic. So that's sort of how we do things in Canada.
And the express entry program, how well do you think it works?
Well, it's a good program. It basically prevents a backlog from occurring, because instead of just accepting fees from everyone and then promising that you're going to process the applications, which led to multi-year backlogs. The Conservative government brought it in years ago, modeling Australia, who modeled New Zealand. And under the Express Entry program, it works very well because it controls the numbers coming in.
Okay, Senator Amidvar, tell me if you think it's accurate to say that the current system puts a priority on high-skilled workers at the cost of others.
I would say that is absolutely the case. Our entire system over the last decade or more has been predicated to searching out the best and brightest talent in the high-skilled fields like STEM, etc., to come to Canada. And that's not. But what is wrong is that we've taken a one-dimensional look at the labor market instead of looking at it as a whole. And, now we know, after the crisis, we know that, yes, we need those engineers and technical wizards, but they also need their care looked after. They need their food to be picked in farms and put on the table. So this addiction to skilled workers, as I'm now wanting to call it, has really skewed our sense of the labor market as a whole. Yes, we need those, but we need the others too. And the entire system is geared towards providing opportunities for permanence to people with high skills. And it is not friendly in the same way as it is to high skilled workers, as it is to low skilled workers, for transitioning one way or the other from impermanence, temporary work permits that are limited in scope, that limit you to a certain industry, but then allow you at some point to move into permanence. That pathway is extremely fraught. There are a couple of pilots, but again, the government in its wisdom has set the criteria for these pilots so high. Let me just give you an example. There is a special pilot for ag workers. They can apply for permanency under certain conditions. The criteria, the educational criteria, is high school equivalency. As a result, I've heard from the government that they've received less than 55 applications to date. No wonder. So the whole thing is skewed in a way, and this is a time not to tinker or reset, but possibly to transform. You spoke about express entry, Steve. Express entry is just an instrument. It's a portal, and if it works for skilled engineers and people with with graduate degrees, it should work. In the same way, it can work for personal support givers and semi-skilled healthcare professionals, as well as migrant workers, if we have the political will to do so.
Well, you've anticipated my next question, and let me follow up with Jenna on that. Could we take the express entry approach and use it for the other groups that Senator Omidyar has just referenced?
Well, I think it would need a major overhaul to work for any group of applicants beyond those university, college education without high official language skills and demonstrated settlement funds, which is how it's worked thus far. It also requires people to have had work experience in Canada that is 12 months in duration at minimum. And so most migrant workers in agriculture, for example, wouldn't qualify for the express entry as it's currently organized. And the pilots that the senator mentioned also have excluded workers that have been coming to Canada for 20 years under the seasonal agriculture worker program because they failed to meet that bar. And so overall, I think it could work as a mechanism, but all the criteria would have to be modified and changed to recognize that that it's not about having a university degree that's going to enable you to participate and integrate into the labor market. It's, do you have the skills that are needed in our economy right now? And absolutely, we need people with those skills.
All right. Well, Senator Omidyar, let me go back to you on that. It doesn't sound as if you could just take the template of the express entry program and apply it to all these other groups. Jen has made it sound a little more complicated than that. Fair to say?
It's fair to say the criteria would have to be shifted, but the structure of the program, which is people enter into a room, they apply, they pay the fees, they wait for the pick, and then you go on to the next cohort. That system could apply. Clearly, of course, the criteria would have to be changed. Who would want to set criteria for people working in the ag fields at the same level as we would for high-skilled workers? That of course makes complete sense to do that.
Okay.
If I could jump in.
Yeah, Robert, go ahead.
Steve. Actually, I just wanted to make one slight correction. Express entry doesn't actually require that you have a year of Canadian experience. There are several different programs within express entry. There's the Federal Skilled Trades. There's the Federal Skilled Worker Program, from which you could enter express entry having no Canadian work experience, but actually work experience from abroad. And then there's the Canada Experience class. So there's three kind of streams into it. And then frankly, the provincial nominee programs give you an automatic 600 points, where the threshold for express entry is in the 400s. So right there, you're gonna have no problem getting in. So they could theoretically, to borrow from what Senator Almodovar is saying, and what you're suggesting, Steve, they could actually create a stream, a new program with an express entry, where they do a specific draw for that particular program, which is what they currently do. They actually do occasionally do specific draws for the Canada Experience class or the Federal Skilled Worker program. So they could actually, and the Federal Skilled Trade program. So they could actually create a new program which would tap into low skilled workers and then do a draw. And by the way, we do have a caregiver program which they've entirely revamped, such that, and this is what Senator Almodovar was saying, there are these sort of pilots. And again, I would say that it's not working as quickly as it needs to. There's a huge demand in Canada, and they should be, but they are at least, instead of doing it the other way, bringing them in as foreign workers, and then sometimes they never qualify for the permanent residence criteria and can never transition to permanent residence. Now we've flipped that on its head, and we've said, okay, we're now going to look at whether you qualify for permanent residence before we give you what's going to be a sectoral open work permit as a caregiver.
All right. In the midst of Jenna's last answer, she referenced international students, and I want to pick up the conversation there. And I guess to get our discussion started here, let's quote something from the Toronto Star. This was in a recent edition. The tuition fees of international students are generally 3 to 4 times above what domestic students pay. The students contribute more than $21 billion annually to the Canadian economy, and international education has become a default pathway for immigration to Canada. As I pointed out when we had just talked to the minister, that $21 billion annually is the case when the students are here. We know a lot of them are not here, of course, because of COVID-19. But for those who are in Canada, and Ravi, why don't you pick up on this? For those who are in Canada, the 18-month work permit extension that was just announced by the feds, how adequate to the task do you think that is?
Well, it's a great initiative because people come here as students and they expect to be able to get Canadian work experience. And, because of the recession, because of the pandemic, they haven't been able to. And so they're extending it 18 months, which is wonderful. But there's a major problem with respect to international students in my mind. We bring in 640,000 now. I mean, 10 years ago, we brought in just over 200,000. That is a massive increase in the number of international students. And for sure, the community colleges and universities benefit. Absolutely. And there's Canadian employment that comes out of that. But it's on the backs of these, international students who are paying exorbitant fees, and they expect to be able to get immigration. But if you look at the numbers that are on the work permits that you get when you graduate, remember, 640 coming in, there's only 100,000 that are on these work permits, and there's only 30,000 spots in terms of 2019 under the Canada Experience class that I referenced earlier. Only 30,000 came under the Canada Experience class, and some of those would have come directly on work permits, not come through the school system. And sure, there's some that come under the provincial nominee programs, but the point is that in terms of the room in the levels planning, even the expanded levels planning is not going to cut it in terms of all these students coming in. So I really have concerns about the students coming in, and they're paying all these fees. They're paying a lot of immigration consultants are getting lucrative commissions, from the colleges. Now, I don't know of any lawyers because it's a conflict of interest in my mind to send them in, and they send them to these private colleges for which you cannot even get the coveted work permit afterwards and can't transition to permanent residence. So I think that, I have deep concerns about the numbers we're bringing in. It's not all a good news story, is all I'm saying. All
right, let's get some feedback to that. Jenna Hennebree, do you want to weigh in on whether we're not actually doing right by these international students at the end of the day?
Well, I think, Ravi pointed to the stats, which indicate that very few, in terms of proportion of the international students, are able to access the pathways for permanent residency as they stand. So I think more needs to be done to enhance those pathways and recognize that students have come, they've ended up working in our economy as well. They often come leaving their families behind. And so I think they've put a great deal of effort into coming to Canada and have chosen Canada, and we want to attract them and want them to stay. So I think more needs to be done to adjust the system to expand the numbers of entry from that category.
Yeah, Senator Almodovar, it's a great deal for us because, of course, they pay so much more than domestic students to come to our post-secondary institutions. But having said that, are we doing right by them?
I think Ravi and Jenna have pointed out the failings and our weaknesses in our system. I personally know of a number of international foreign students whose permits have not been renewed or whose work permits are lagging. So I think the government does need to put the pedal to the metal and facilitate this paperwork. However, I will say that there's another aspect to this conversation, and that is the reliance of Canada's post-secondary education institutes on foreign students to meet their bottom line. And this is serious. If those foreign students do not arrive in the numbers that we predict that they will arrive in, and that is a whole different question. Our post-secondary educational institutions will need some serious help from different levels of government. And I would also say that economies of whole small towns in the Maritimes have done incredibly well with international foreign students, and the economy of whole communities is structured around their presence. And, that is going to be another unintended outcome. And finally, I would note, Canada has long aspired to compete better with Australia, the UK, and the US on foreign students, and we've never been able to do so. And then, voila, we got President Trump, and what we're experiencing is, in a sense, the last gasp of the Trump bump of students coming to Canada as opposed to choosing the United States. And we know that that is going to change in the next 4 years. Okay. So we will face competition on all fronts.
Right. Ravi, can you pick up on that? Because, the Trump bump is coming to an end. And, for example, I know Cape Breton University in the Maritimes, fully half their students are international students. And if because of COVID and if because of a Trump bump or whatever, they just stop coming, that's, the implications for that post-secondary institution are quite ominous. What are you seeing out there in terms of what could derail our ability to attract post-secondary students from other countries?
Well, for sure. Canada pivoted when America, created this America First strategy. We had deliberate programs, for sure in terms of international students, but also in terms of, categories for work permits, IT workers. We created entire programs to attract people. So I guess my concern, though, is that, I agree with Senator Almodvar. We need to fund and support these communities that have been so reliant on them. But my concern is that, a lot of students that I talk to, their parents have paid their life savings for them to be able to come to Canada. The pressure on them is enormous. We know of a few suicides that have happened because the pressure has been too much. Sometimes they're coming and they're not able to do well academically. They're not vetted properly. Again, they're using these immigration consultants, and I just find that it's very sad. And I think that we need to shift. Either we create more room, as has been suggested. I think that that's a good idea in terms of making sure that those who are coming here and spending this vast sums of money have a pathway to immigration. But we also, we just need to think about the sheer number that we're bringing in, because I don't know that we can all of a sudden increase immigration to like 600,000. I don't know that's going to happen overnight. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Senator Almodvar, let me get you to weigh in on something else. Last month, Canada began prioritizing permanent residence applications from refugee claimants working in Canada's healthcare sector. How do you think that's going?
Well, let's start with thinking about how Canadians think, because politics is an expression of public will. The latest polls that have come out from Environics and others suggest that Canadians they've always been supportive of immigration, but the new numbers are frankly surprising in their support for immigration, their understanding of the contribution of immigrants to the economy, even in parts of the country which were always more unfriendly, let's say, to immigrants. So now we have an offer and a program out to asylum seekers who have worked during the COVID crisis. It's a pragmatic strategy. We need those numbers. We need their applications. We need to approve them so that we can reach our target of 411,000 this year. And personally, I think if the government is going to meet these targets, it's going to have to dig deeper into the community of asylum seekers who are already here. They don't have to travel. Many are already working. Many are, in fact, working in the service economy, which we know is not temporary. It's not going away. So I think if they can make it work politically, it would be a win for them to open up permanent landing streams for more asylum seekers who are already here. It could also, however, on the opposite side, it could constitute a pull factor for more asylum seekers, and the system is already quite stretched, I will say. So I mean, you have to weigh the pros and cons of a political decision you make. I'm just glad I'm not the minister making that decision. I would advise him, though, to look very seriously at this option.
Okay, Jenna, you want to follow up on that? Is there a strong case to be made that this kind of option ought to be extended to refugees beyond those who are working in healthcare?
Indeed, I think we need to be thinking about a whole range of refugee claimants with a variety of skill levels. But I also think it should be expanded to include those that are here with other permits. We need more such pathways to regularization. So not just among claimants, among precarious, any migrant with precarious status, in fact, because those that are here on work permits without opportunities to stay legally in Canada, without those pathways, they're either going to return to countries of origin, and therefore their investments and our investments towards their integration and contributions to the economy are lost, or they might try to obtain another work permit, which may heighten their precarity. And in many cases, they have no other option but to overstay their permit. And then we're growing our undocumented migration in Canada. And I think we need to think really carefully about creating a system that's set up to fail if we've expanded the numbers of opportunities for people to come temporarily, but then not matched it equally with opportunities and pathways for residency.
Ravi, let me get you to put your views on the record on this next angle, which is the recent reopening of the parents and grandparents lottery system. How would you characterize that move by the government?
Well, I think it's in a way a bit of a political decision. I think that there's always pressure from the different ethnic communities across the country for this particular program. It's wildly popular. I think the demand is about 100,000 a year. There are many immigrants that expect to be able to bring their parents when they come here. But the actual levels plan allows for about 20,000 a year. So last year, due to COVID, there were about 10,000 that were invited. This year, there's going to be 30,000. So, I think that when you think about this program, yes, there are cultural reasons why we want to have parents and grandparents coming. I mean, they instill values in their grandkids. Also, there are some economic reasons. I mean, people, may say, well, look, bringing in older people at a time when, we have an aging population and we have a lot of older people accessing the healthcare system, do we really want to be doing that? And I think that's why we keep the numbers low. But on the other hand, in my experience, when you bring in grandparents, what happens is they may take care of the grandkids, and then the parents of the little kids who brought them in are able to then both work and contribute to the tax base. So I don't think you can look at it purely in terms of, there's non-economic reasons to bring them in. But having said that, I think that I understand why the government is not sort of just opening the door wide open and allowing just all those who want to come in to enter.
Okay. Senator Omivar, another program I'd like you to weigh in on, and that is the Municipal Nominee Program, which essentially tries to get people to come to Canada and then not have everybody living in the sort of most densely populated parts of the country. Let's get people out to more sparsely populated parts of the country. How well is that working in your view?
Well, it's really new, and I think it's a really smart innovation. I have to credit the department and the minister for trying new things. The municipal nominee program is smart because at its heart, integration is a local experience, not a national experience. Immigration may well be a national experience or something like that. But when you think of the municipal nominee program and its objective to ensure that people choose less dense parts of our country, I think it also presents an opportunity. There is no reason why the municipal nominee program could not be embraced in rural agricultural communities where the rural farmers or farm businesses get together with the mayor and the Board of Trade and put forward a proposal to settle and to nominate 4 families, let's say, or 10 families, or whatever it is, as if we can stretch the current imagination of the municipal nominee program to extend to municipal settlement in high need areas of low-skilled work, then I think it really becomes a robust mechanism to enable us to get people to where the jobs are and the jobs to the people.
Right. Ravi, how well do you think it's working?
Well, as Senator Almond-Barr said, it's a very new program. I think that there are all these different programs that they're coming up with, the rural program, the northern program, municipal program. They're all good ideas. I mean, anything we could do to sort of move people around to areas where they wouldn't otherwise settle. They often will pick, Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, Edmonton, some of the larger cities. And I think that if the government can do things to move people around, I think I'm all for it.
Everybody seems to be all for this, Jenna, but the question of whether or not, if, for example, you come from, let's say, a very densely populated part of, I'll just pick any country out of the blue here, India, and then somehow the notion that you're going to feel comfortable moving into a very sparsely populated part of Canada, that's just not going to be on for many people. Do you think this can work?
Well, sure, I think it can work to some extent. I think we know that communities are in need of immigration and can welcome immigrants regardless of where they come from. But what's needed is investment in the settlement infrastructure in those areas. Local or integration happens locally, yes, but it happens with support. It happens with investment in community level supports, everything from translation to language training that's needed in order to welcome immigrants in those communities. So it needs to be matched with investments in that regard as well.
Okay, we're less than 5 minutes to go here, and I'd love to get all three of you to weigh in on this, this question that I suspect you all hear from time to time. And I asked the minister this question as well, so let me get your views on it, maybe a minute and change to each of you. I'm sure there are Canadians watching this right now who are thinking, immigration just ought not to be the priority of this country right now. We got people with problems here. We're spending a heck of a lot of money as a federal government and provinces to a lesser extent trying to deal with the after effects of COVID-19. Our focus should be on the folks here as opposed to the folks who are not yet here but are coming. Okay, let's get your 3 takes on that. Jenny, you want to start?
Sure. Canada's population is aging. The number of working age Canadians for every senior is dropping. It's going to be around 2.7 in 2030. This means the working age population is shrinking. And we absolutely need immigration to account for the net increase in Canada's labor force. And it can't just be with temporary migrant workers used to fill this gap in a second-rate, second-tiered way where they don't have the same access to services and transition pathways to permanent residency. It's vital that we recognize that skills shortages aren't just at the high level. They're also in skills, in jobs and cooks and cashiers and farm workers. We need people to fill those jobs over the long term.
Ravi Jain, your view.
Well, I think that, bringing in people, sometimes, it's a matter of family reunification. So when people say Canadians first, what about when you're bringing in your loved one, when you're bringing in your spouse or your common law partner or your boyfriend or girlfriend, which we're now allowing to happen, by the way, because of COVID restrictions. So I think that we need to think about that. I would totally agree with what Professor Henry said. And the minister talked about this too. We have an aging population, low birth rate. All labor force growth comes from immigration. I also think, as was noted in the Globe recently, immigration is a form of economic stimulus. And look what happened in the last recession. We didn't shut our borders down, far from it. So we've got a heck of a lot of debt that we've been piling on. So we need the economic stimulus that immigrants bring. And by the way, the one thing the minister didn't talk about, and we haven't talked about yet, is the fact that we have a very dismal number of people coming in as entrepreneurs and investors. Look at the startup visa program. There were 500 people that came in 2019. Last year, there were 255. That is pathetic. I mean, we are competing with the rest of the world for people who can start businesses. There's $1 trillion of businesses of people who came as immigrants years ago, created convenience stores, etc. They're all retiring. Their kids are professionals. They don't want to do that anymore. What are we going to do with all these businesses? So that's one thing we have not talked about yet, but I think that the minister needs to seriously think about that.
Last minute to the independent senator.
Thank you, Steve. I think immigration is all about looking after citizens in the here and now and in the tomorrow, as Ravi and Jenna have pointed out. Our very citizens today would be worse off without the immigrants today and the streams of immigrants that are supposed to be coming in. Ask any landlord in Toronto how they're feeling right now with the lower number of immigrants. 1 in 3 businesses, as the minister said, is led by an immigrant. Many of these are small businesses that provide goods and services in many ways in our neighborhoods and our community. The labor market, the demographics, the future of our country is all predicated to a very large extent on a successful immigration policy. It's not only Canada's success is not only about immigration, but immigration is a very, very large part of this narrative that we want to successfully plot out for the future, not just today, but I'm looking into the turn of the century, and I like the idea that by the turn of this century, Canada will not be 37 million people, but 100 million people. That's the scale we need to think about to secure our future prosperity, and the only way to get there is through immigration.
And I look forward to having this group on in 80 years to come back on this program and continue the conversation to see whether or not these turn-of-the-century predictions in fact come true. Senator Ratna Omidvar, it's great to have you on our program again. Ravi Jain, the partner at Green & Spiegel LLP. Jenna Henry at the Balsillie School of International Affairs and Wilfrid Laurier University. Thanks to the three of you, and stay safe out there.
Thank you,
Steve.
Bye. Thank you.
And that is the agenda for Monday, January 18th, 2021. With just 2 days until the U.S. presidential inauguration, we'll talk to 2 leading American political scientists about how to heal the deep divides in their country. Also, we look at what COVID-19 has done to Ontario's so-called hallway medicine problem. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.